Are you sick of feeling invisible and like what you're doing isn't making an impact in your world? If so, this Adapting to Fear, the Fear of Being Invisible video is for you. In today's video, we're going to describe what the fear of being invisible is, what it looks like sometimes and how we use maladaptive strategies to cope with it, and then we'll go into some tips on what to do with it to be able to build a more integrated and whole relationship with this fear and being able to up the quality of your life. So let's do some learning. So the fear of being invisible is the fear that you are not making impact on the world around you. And the fear that if you're not making an impact, that means you yourself have no value. So it really comes down to this underlying fear that you don't have any intrinsic value. And because of this, you end up seeking approval and signs that you have intrinsic value in the outside world. Now, this is a trap because the outside world as a whole already knows you have intrinsic values. All humans are created equal. It's not really a question on that in the systems and things that are in our world. And because of that, they are not designed to make you feel better about your value. And then they also, at the end of the day, also don't care to and may actually get annoyed or push back on you if you are trying to make systems in the outside world validate your intrinsic worth. So it's just not a good thing. And intrinsic worth really is something that is internal, and we have to feel it internal, and then we build off of it. The outside world really doesn't have a say or have an ability to do anything about that. So if you're not doing that internal work, no amount of outside feedback is going to give that to you. And that's one of the core problems. And so the way we adapt to it as we're seeking that outside feedback, one of the issues that come with it is when you're looking with that filter, that means you are not actually receiving the feedback that you're getting from the outside world, good or bad, as is. And that makes it very hard to be prepared to actually make the changes that you need to actually thrive in the world. Because if you're not, you have to be able to receive and actually hear things the way they actually are and then act according to it. And if you're throwing into it that somehow that's talking about your value, that interaction is not happening. It's very dysfunctional. And this, shows up in like many narratives. You may have heard that or whatever, like, why am I not getting the same rewards as everyone else for the same amount of work? Or why can't people just appreciate what I'm giving? Narratives like that end up cropping up. And then if those stick around long term, they can devolve into a way more nihilistic view of the world. And to a point where that narrative might turn into like, what does it even matter? My presence doesn't matter at all. They didn't even notice I was there in the first place. And that can obviously turn really dark or dysfunctional or end up becoming an excuse not even to try or to opt out of things in your life that you really need to be a part of. And that ends up becoming the excuse. So that's a lot of that feeds that narrative and things like that. So going into the tips section, one thing to realize about any narratives that you have built around, confirming this I'm invisible narrative really needs to be scratched. The building blocks of that, there really isn't anything to manipulate or play with to actually get into a better relationship with this fear. The narratives itself are just very destructive and they kind of just need to be tossed to the side and started from scratch. And you can do that by starting by asking some questions. So here's our first tip you want to ask really deep questions of yourself, like, what do you do and will continue doing regardless of what others, if they acknowledge them or not, if they push back on them or not. These are just things that you're going to keep on doing. And it's really important to know those because those are your values. And you really need to build a new narrative based off your values. And from there, you can help you connect with your actual sense of intrinsic worth. And it's very important because if you you have values, and if you are not honoring them, then that feels like self-betrayal. And if you are constantly betraying yourself because you are not living up to your values, that is where that gnawing sense of not having any worth coming from. Because do you really have, I mean, how are you supposed to feel like you have worth if you can't even trust yourself? So it's very important to do the work to locate your values and then build a better relationship where you are not betraying yourself anymore. And from there, then you can kind of see where that goes, right? If you know why you're doing what you're doing and why it's important, you're not going to need outside validation. You're not going to need to go pick a fight because you're just going to be able to live contained in yourself because you know why you're doing what you're doing. And so it's very important to, if you don't want to be feeling invisible, to know and to start acting on your values. Our second tip is when you are feeling invisible, you really need to acknowledge the fact that where this is also coming from is you are predetermining what you want other people to acknowledge you for. I want them to know I'm a good worker. I want them to know I'm kind, or whatever it is. You're predetermining what other people are going to acknowledge to you. And that is a problem because most of the time when people are doing this, it is not, they have a foundation in reality. So the basis that you're actually going to get that feedback is very slim, or if you get it, it's going to feel very condescending and stuff. Because often when you're struggling with this fear, you're going to pick things that do not have a foundation in reality. And so what you really need to do is be able to take a sober look at reality and actually hear what feedback people are telling you. What are other people saying are your strengths? What are other people saying are your weaknesses? And being, for the actual impact that you're having in the world. And, then you can actually do things with that feedback and adapt to the world. So, acknowledge the fact that you're trying to predetermine and trying to control what other people are going to appreciate for you. And, like that saying goes or whatever, what other people think about you is none of your business. So it's none of your business and you cannot control it. It is not your task to determine what other people are going to think about you, but you can hear what they're saying and adapt to that. And lastly, even as you build a new narrative, it's going to be very easy to get caught back up in it. So some things that can happen when you're feeling that draw and that pull back to go back into that old nihilistic narrative that's keeping you trapped in this fear is to realize maybe there's another mundane explanation on why you're not being acknowledged. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe you didn't actually say what you needed to say to get the reaction you were looking for. Maybe it has nothing to do with you. Maybe they're just hungry and they're thinking about lunch. Or maybe their mind is just so autopilot they can't even see what you're doing. That is a very common one. People have their own lenses and they're just seeing and they're responding, and then you're just a side character popping in and out. And that's fine. And you need to just recognize that that is our role in other people's lives sometimes, is to be side character. You're only the main character in your own story. And everyone is a main character in their own stories. And you got to accept that role. And you have to accept that you're not a star in other people's stories, and that if you're not doing the right interactions and getting the attentions and stuff, then you're not going to have a, supporting role. You're going to be delegated down. And that's just okay. That's just the way reality works. And so we've got to get comfortable with those mundane explanations and just give people grace that they're just living their lives, just like we're living their lives. And like I said, it has nothing to do with your intrinsic worth. It has nothing to do with their intrinsic worth. It's just the way it goes. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that made sense. Please check out the rest of our Adapting to Fear playlist. Like, subscribe, all those things. And I hope to see you in another video. Have a great rest of your night.